I personally think that the greatest threat to fairness in women's sports is the anti-trans movement itself. They have now put a target on the back of every elite woman athlete. It has given them permission to question the gender of any woman, any girl who doesn't fit their preconceived image of what a girl athlete should be. Our sports are going to be stripped of our best athletes. The agenda is to push us back to the 1950s.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Talking Politics with Mom, where I, a progressive millennial, talk to my formerly conservative boomer mom about politics. Now, there's a real threat to women and girls' sports in America right now. Some cohorts of teen girls are dropping out in massive numbers. Many girls are losing out on their opportunities to compete. And many of the greatest women athletes are being viciously attacked online. And it turns out none of this is because of trans people. Last time on the podcast, my mom and I discussed her changing views on the participation of trans athletes in sports. Today, we're going to take a look into the anti-trans movement itself, what their true goals are, and how the forces of money and transphobia are affecting women and girls' athletics. Now, we recorded this podcast before the recent fight on this issue between anti-trans activists Riley Gaines and Simone Biles broke out online, so we won't be discussing that. I'll just point out that Riley recently posted this online, equating serial predator Larry Nassar, who repeatedly abused Simone Biles and well over 200 girls, to trans people. Make of that what you will. The other quick thing I'll point out is that the right-wing media has gone into an absolute frenzy over this whole situation, and the media ecosystem surrounding the issue of trans participation in sports is something that we'll be talking about in this episode. We also recorded this episode before the whole controversy surrounding the participation of a trans athlete in the California state finals took place. But I added some thoughts at the end of this episode about that situation because I think the whole thing reinforces everything we're talking about here. So make sure to stick around to the end to hear a full breakdown. If you're getting something out of these discussions, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, or checking out our Patreon. All right, let's get into it. Hi, Mom.
Hello, child.
So last week we talked about trans athletes and the evolution of your thinking about the participation of trans athletes in women's sports. And as what often happens with us, we keep talking about the subject, we keep learning more about it, but this article came across our attention that I think started a conversation between us that revealed a lot about both the nature of the attacks on trans athletes and what's really at the heart of the fundamental unfairness in women's sports. Two trans women found themselves competing against each other in some tournament in England in the game of pool. And all of the typical people that you would expect, like Riley Gaines and other anti-trans people who have latched themselves on to this issue, were freaking out. The Voldemort of anti-trans bigotry in this regard, J.K. Rowling, retweeted someone who said, "How much longer will you delude yourselves that it is not happening when the ultimate rebuke to that claim is staring you in the face?" And it's a link to a Telegraph article with the headline, "Women's final between two biological men shatters defense for transgender athletes." We're talking about pool here.
Right.
Do you think there's some innate biological advantage that would give transgender women some huge advantage in pool?
You know, I confess I have no idea. But I did look into it a little bit, and there's no research. So
Right.
In the absence of research, you rely on your own story that you fill in the blanks. You know, I looked into it's all anecdotes now, but they're all over the map. Some people say yes, one pro-am player said, no, of course not. Another guy who said he owned a pool hall or billiards parlor for 18 years said, I've seen thousands of players. There's no advantage given by strength. And, when I heard this story that you sent me, I thought to myself, you've got to be kidding. Why am I hearing about a pool tournament in England?
Right.
At all?
Right.
What?
Right.
Like, how did that hit the news?
Mm-hmm.
So I looked into that to find out. I was very surprised at what I found.
I watched a little bit of one of the pool tournaments between one of these trans women and another cis woman. And, I'm not an expert on the fundamental physical advantages that you might need to be good at the game of pool. But it just struck me watching this. Like, they both had the same build.
Right.
No one seemed to be stronger or have longer arms. It just felt absurd to me to think that there's some huge advantage.
Who won?
The cis woman won in that match. So
okay.
Why
didn't we hear that?
Exactly.
Perhaps the transgender woman became more manly
over time. Right. But here's a quote from one of these transgender women in the pool tournament. I've never really considered myself a trailblazer. I'm just a woman who's trying to live my life, and all I want to do is just be treated the same as any other woman. I work in an office environment, and I'm treated like a woman every single day in the rest of my life. This playing pool is the only aspect of my life where I'm not.
I have a message for her. It's not the only aspect of your life in which you're not treated like a woman for much longer.
Yeah, it's going to start encroaching into all other aspects of life. You started looking into the male pool players and the female pool players to see, all right, what's the difference between these two groups? And it seems that maybe men perform better in pool than women on average or at the elite level. But if we're talking about the fact that there's no real innate biological advantage, what is the source of that difference between men and women?
Men have been playing pool for centuries.
Right.
For centuries.
Yeah.
And it's been an exclusively male domain. Women weren't allowed in pool halls, which are kind of everywhere. They weren't allowed until the late 60s. So you're talking about a very short period of time. That women have had to try to catch up. So here you have far more experience with a sport. It means you have more mentors. It means that you are initiated into like a whole culture where you learn from masters who teach you their tricks. You play against really good players who are much better than you are, and it makes you have to improve. And if you have huge number of men playing, which they do, far more than women, it means that you have a much larger group of potential champions in there. And the larger your numbers, the more likely it is that that one person who has the gifts to play pool or whatever sport is also going to have the desire to be a champion. And when you put those two things together, you get world-class athletes. And women have a far smaller number. They have a far smaller pool to draw from. So it's not surprising that they're far behind. They're not that far behind. The best women players in the world will eventually catch up to the best men. I don't have any doubt about that. But the players in the middle, the men come with this centuries of advantage. And when women have tried to compete with men, they've been shut out of their tournaments. The men didn't want women in the tournaments. And truthfully, you can't get better unless you play against people who are way better than you. Every athlete knows that. If you want to get better as a women basketball player, you play with men. It made me think about the enormous cultural advantage that they have.
So really what we're talking about here is not some innate biological advantage in the sport. We're talking about social and legal differences in a lot of ways between the way male sports is treated by society and the way women's and girls sports is treated.
I mean, aren't the Chads that you were telling me about, the number 10 men, aren't they the great athletes?
Right.
And I mean, pool especially has always been linked in the popular mind with hustlers and tough guys. You know, it's like it's the male sport. You know, the guy who's the alpha comes into a pool hall and just wipes the table with all the opponents.
Right. I don't know that I've ever seen James Dean play pool, but I can imagine it in my head. It's the Rat Pack. It's a sign of masculinity. And in society, we celebrate male athleticism and we don't celebrate women's athleticism.
So the women come in with an inherent disadvantage immediately, you know, because the men outnumber them so greatly. So when they go into these spaces, the women players all have lots of stories about beating a much more, you know, like an inferior male who just treats them like dirt anyway. Like, I was trying to lose. I really wasn't trying. You know, they just don't accept women. And they have generations of teachers and experience and education and practice and opportunity and praise and money. It's amazing that women have gotten as far as they have. But the first thing that struck me about this kerfuffle about this was it reminded me of a story I read in Mad Magazine. Because you know I love Mad Magazine.
Oh, yes,
I read
I know.
it constantly in my, you know. And it was an article called A Do-It-Yourself Guide to a Vietnam War Newspaper Story.
Okay.
So I have it right here.
Nice.
Mad Magazine.
I wonder if that's worth something.
It probably is. And you see, there it is.
Okay, right. It's sort of like a Mad Libs
It's kind of like
guide.
The story's all written out. You just fill in the blanks.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked into this and I thought, why am I hearing about this? Why have I never heard about this before? And I'm going to send you a copy of a graph I found.
Okay.
That the stories in Fox News, I looked it up, about trans people, just people in general, were just like this until about 2020, and they went like this. And it just, that's when we started to hear about all of this. And it coincides with new management in some of these right-wing, religious, uber-conservative groups that are funded in the hundreds of millions of dollars, you know, who all share information, whose fingerprints are all over the overthrow of Roe versus Wade, the attack on gay marriage, the attack on drag queens in libraries, on book banning. They have thousands of lawyers on their call list. They write model legislation banning trans treatment and all of this other stuff. And they have right-wing legislators on their Rolodex, on their speed dial, so that they just pump this stuff out. They commit hundreds of thousands of dollars to testing their messages. They have a whole stable of spokespeople that they train. They tell people in their circle, just in their churches and all of this, to be on the lookout for trans offenses and to call them when they see them. So they have spies everywhere. And this is the thing that I love the most. They have a cheat sheet, which they give to their spokesperson people. And it says, instead of saying homophobia, say convictions against sexual behavior. Instead of saying sex education, say sexual indoctrination.
Oh, gosh.
Instead of saying gay and lesbian civil rights movement, say homosexual agenda.
Oh, man.
We need one of these. We definitely need one of these. We should work on it every day.
Mm-hmm.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. This is a brilliant execution of a plot, of a plan, of a conspiracy. They have orchestrated this so beautifully. I mean, my hat's off to them. The end game is not a incredibly small minority of people who were completely off the radar of everyone until they got this idea 4 years ago. That's not the agenda. The agenda is to push us back to the 1950s. The agenda is to reverse the gains of gay people. It's to restrict the rights of parents. It's to tell schools that they can't teach about the actual history of the United States. It's kind of like an intellectual takeover and stupidifying of the entire American population.
Yeah. If somehow you believe that this movement was about protecting women in athletics, it's being spearheaded by groups that are not only attacking trans people, but gay people, and specifically women's rights as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the play. That's the play. I mean, it seems to be driven partially by religious convictions. It's being driven by uber conservative people who don't seem to care about what the blowback is in terms of how it will destroy people's lives.
Right.
They just don't care. But it's very scary, and you should be scared.
Yeah. And so we've established that trans athletes are not a threat to women's sports, but there is actually something that is a threat to women's and girls' sports.
The basic research that I did took me about, 45 minutes. Governor Newsom.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not nearly as smart as that guy, and he is a smart guy. So for him, after I read this, I thought, no, that's just not right.
So like you right now should come out and be like, you know what? The young man who's about to win the state championship in the long jump in female sports,
right.
that shouldn't happen. You as the governor should step out and say no.
No, and I appreciate.
But like, would you do something like that? Would you say no men in female sports?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness. I completely agree with you on that.
What you said is just not right. And you know it. I hope you know it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which is worse, if you don't know it, if you do know it.
Well, to take a quick pause on Governor Newsom, I think he's making a political wager that the trans athletes in sports is a lost cause as an issue. Most people think it's unfair, and so I'm just going to attach myself to that, and maybe there will be a political advantage. But it feels like politicians have lost the ability to say, you know what? I'm going to try and persuade people about certain issues. And if the issue that you're so concerned about is unfairness in women's sports, here are the things that we should actually do to create more opportunities for women athletes. And there's a whole lot of things that you could do that would make a real difference in creating many more opportunities for women who want to play sports.
Yeah, that is true. There's a lot of research on this, actually. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, but it did coincide with what my experience was and what, you would figure out if you thought about it for, about 5 minutes, which is that the biggest issue is money. And money is the underpinning of almost all of it, because money buys you coaches, money buys you access, money buys you experience, money buys you uniforms, money buys you, the ability to compete in a league, resources, education, mentoring, all of that stuff. Money buys you more spots in high school, where high school boys have over 1 million more spots in sports than girls do. Money buys you scholarships. Money buys you, when you're in college, it buys you travel expenses. It buys you all this kind of stuff. It buys you exposure. So what's the deal with money? The first deal is the poorer you are, the less you play. And the participation of Black youth in particular has cratered over the last 10 years. It used to be, at least on the boys' side, it was higher than the participation of white kids. And now it has almost collapsed. And it seems to be completely economic. The families can't afford it, and it hits girls the worst. Their participation has gone, through the floor. I know, as having coached, a team in working class neighborhoods, the girls have to stay home to watch the kids. The girls have to have a job to work to help the family. They oftentimes just don't have time for it. Or the girls have to travel somewhere. If you're in a poor area, all the kids have to travel to the gym or to wherever. They don't have the money. They literally don't have the money. If you make less than $40,000 a year, you are going to have serious trouble getting your kids to participate in sport. And if you make less than $25,000, it's almost hopeless. And that affects white kids and Black kids and Hispanic kids. It's not just a racial thing, but it hits the Black community really hard. And the other thing that's going on, and if you pay any attention to youth sports, you know this, is that hedge funds and private equity are spending billions of dollars in a complete takeover of youth sports. They're buying out what used to be independent leagues, AAU traveling teams, and all this kind of stuff, and using their financial power to do things like rent public facilities that used to be available for open gym, and even, the gym used to be available for bridge games for seniors. The hedge funds are coming in and basically saying, I'll pay you a lot of money to rent that gym for my team, because the same people, frankly, who are losing their minds over a handful of trans kids and screaming about unfairness will never vote to fund the high schools or to fund the parks and rec so that kids have opportunities to play. So if you want to talk about fairness, you want to talk about opportunity, you want to talk about developing your skills, having good coaches, having a mentor, you need money. And there's a real crisis in youth sports because of money. So if you really care about fairness, Governor Newsom, you should look at the fact that California is almost dead last in the country in the participation of girls in sports. Only Louisiana, Rhode Island, and Mississippi are worse. And you're the governor, and you have the power to get money into those sports to revive the chances of girls. So do it. And it will have far more effect than saying that one trans woman is very unfair.
Right. Yeah. And, I think this is a Joe Biden quote, actually, but I think he said at one point, show me your budget and I'll show you your values.
Yes, that's very true. I looked at college. I mean, the lower levels are more important because that's where the kids really need the support of sports.
Right.
If you're an athlete like me, you generally somehow you find a way.
Right.
But once you get to college, where all of this kerfuffle started with one trans athlete winning a race, they were complaining about she took a roster spot. Well, you know what? Fewer women participate in sports in college than men. For every dollar they spend on sports in NCAA colleges, they spend 35 cents on the women's side, even though women outnumber men at college by almost 3 million people. She's not taking your roster spot. What's happening is there's not enough roster spots for everybody who's qualified to compete at that level. And it's because of funding. 65 cents of every dollar goes to men's scholarships. If you want to get in the fight for fairness, get in the fight for fixing that. That's a really unsexy fight. That's boring. That does not make headlines. No one cares about that. But it's way more important than 5 trans women competing in a cohort of 250,000 women in college sports. Stop fighting with each other over the crumbs that they throw at our feet. You know, this is a fight that we had 4 generations ago. And we took the heat, and they called us bitches and men and unfeminine and queers and all of this stuff. We just fought the fight anyway, and we thought we had gotten there. And then we found out they had a new way to turn us against each other. It's been half a century since Title IX was passed, and we are nowhere near getting the money in any kind of equitable division in college. So I say to the women who are upset about trans women coming into the sport in the minuscule numbers, but still, if it affects you, I suppose you feel it more. Look at the real cause of the unfairness. It's not 5 trans women. It's the men who are in charge, who are overwhelmingly in charge of money, athletic directors, and all of those things that actually control the purse strings. Get in that fight and demand more money and more slots for your program. That's where the fight is. That's where the unfairness is.
I want to circle back to one point you made earlier about this Mad Magazine way that these articles are written. You know, I think my antenna has been up since we had our first conversation to notice these articles that get sprinkled around on the internet. I found one article about a high jumper. I think it was in Oregon, and the headline was something like, this person, when they competed as a male, placed last, and now they won this high jump competition. And then I went into it's from the New York Post, of course.
Of course.
I dive into the article and find out, okay, yes, when this athlete was competing against boys in one of the competitions, they placed last, but in another one they placed second. So and their best jump when they were competing against boys and identified as a boy was 5 feet. They won this competition by jumping 4 feet 8 inches. I looked up the high school record for women's high jump, and it was 6 feet 7 inches. So this is like 2 feet. So this is just some obscure track meet where a trans, girl won a competition. But like you say, they've got spies out there. They've got their Mad Lib rules for how to write these articles. But, what would this all started with Leah Thomas, and that was the person they found that was like, yes, this is the person, this trans woman athlete wins in an NCAA competition.
Right.
A thing that they, of course, follow, NCAA women's swimming. They, always focus on that. But what would that article really look like? You did an experiment to see what if you were to actually honestly report on that event.
I got this information from news outlets. So it actually was out there. But nobody cared because nobody cares about women's swimming. I'm sorry, it's a wonderful sport. The only time Americans pay attention is during the Olympics. But suddenly, a dozen news outlets showed up at the NCAA swimming finals. Why? Mm-hmm. Because there were demonstrators from 500 miles away and even some from England demonstrating outside. Do you think they just showed up there for no reason? They have all those news outlets on speed dial. They have their spokespeople following their little list of things, So this is really what pissed me off. So here I wrote my little news story for all of you to know, because none of us ever read this. This is about the meet in which the trans swimmer Leah Thomas, who races for an Ivy League school, University of Pennsylvania, won a race.
This is how the story should have been written.
NCAA Division I swimmers returned to the pool with renewed fire this weekend as women athletes celebrated their first NCAA finals meet since the COVID crisis caused the cancellation of last year's season. Almost every event saw records fall, as women shattered records in 13 of 18 events. Kate Douglas of the University of Virginia became the first woman in history to break American records in 3 different individual events, a feat never before achieved in the history of the sport. Including the records set in relays, Douglas broke 6 records, and her teammates Gretchen and Alex Walsh broke 4 records each. Kate Douglas dominated the event, winning 7 titles in 18 events. The 3 swimmers from the University of Pennsylvania, including senior Leah Thomas, did not break any competition or national records. However, Thomas bested her own personal time and set a new Penn program record with a 500-yard freestyle win with a very respectable time. In her other 2 races, Thomas finished 9th place and 5th, respectively. This was a dominating performance by the University of Virginia swimmers. Well, who would read that? They should read it. I mean, the Virginia program killed it. This woman set 6 records in one event, in an NCAA record, in an NCAA event. But you know what the headlines were? That Leah Thomas, a trans woman swimmer, dominated, crushed, annihilated, shattered, decimated. She won by like 1.7 records. I'm not going to put down her record. If you win an NCAA race, you are a champion. Full stop. The fact that your time was, 6, it was considered pretty average time. Maybe it was a slow day. It was clearly a slow day. So what? You won. You got a prize. Good for you. But we were meant to believe, and I believed, that this was the second coming of Michael Phelps in a wig. Mm-hmm. That she shattered these records. She had broken pool records and some Ivy League records during the season. Mm-hmm. And half of them were almost immediately broken again. But, if you get a record, good for you. I'm not going to put it down. I'm just saying that they made this the Armageddon for women's sports. And it's nonsense. It's nonsense. And I'm kind of ashamed of myself that I bought into it. But they know. You don't ever tell. It's a trial lawyer's trick. I'm going to teach you all.
Okay.
You never tell the whole story if the whole story is not on your side. Mm-hmm. You tell part of the story that inflames the jury, and you leave it to the jury to fill in the gaps themselves with their own prejudices, biases, and their own backstories. That's what I did. I heard this Leah Thomas broke 6 records, and I was picturing in my mind these were Olympic records, these were world records, these were NCAA records, and she just decimated the field of women's swimming. It's not even close. Katie Ledecky, Alex Walsh, Katie Douglas are these incredible uber elite athletes. You barely read about them.
And if you do read about them these days, what you're reading about is people accusing them of being men.
Okay, I saw a story. I'm going to show you when this Leah Thomas situation showed up, and I found this picture. And I was like, okay, here's the picture. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you can see that. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty darn buff swimmer right there. Mm-hmm. Big muscles and all this kind of stuff. And you're saying to yourself, okay, she looks somewhat like a man. You know what? Spoiler alert. Mm-hmm. That's Katie Ledecky. Mm-hmm. And the story says, is Katie Ledecky transgender? Mm-hmm. American competitive swimmer Katie Ledecky recently came out as a trans woman. That's what the news story says. No, she didn't. But we're so ready now to assume that great women athletes are trans. Mm-hmm. My hat's off to them for being so clever. And so I'm making it my business to turn that around.
And also to start celebrating women athletes who are dominating and accepting them for however they show up. You've got big muscles, you're strong, you're tall, you have masculine traits. Who cares? Good for you. Go get them, right? Like they don't want women to present in they want a narrow box to put women back into.
Okay, so this was the thing that has really upset me. And it's upset me about myself for not looking into this further, because the information was out there. If it had triggered something in me, said, this is not right, but it didn't, because it seemed somewhat logical that a trans woman would have physical advantages. But then the question was how much? And then I heard the story and I'm like, well, that's the future of women's sports. And it's not, of course. So I was very upset with myself about it. So the more I looked into it, the more distressed I became, because I personally think that the greatest threat to fairness in women's sports, after money, is the anti-trans movement itself. They have now put a target on the back of every elite woman athlete. And when I was a kid, I was so desperate for a role model. I scoured the sports pages for a mention of any woman athlete at all. And there were a few. Althea Gibson, even though she had a very hard time of it. Louise Suggs was a golfer who I knew about because my mother was a golfer. And I had a picture of Wilma Rudolph that I cut out of the newspaper. She was a sprinter in the Olympics. And I cut out her picture and I put it in my school book. Girls really need role models if they really want to succeed. If we as females want to succeed in sport, we desperately need role models. And they have put a target on every successful athlete. There are whispers now about all of them that they're men, and it's a form of policing of policing us again, policing our bodies. You think Roe versus Wade was, the overthrow of Roe versus Wade was bad. They are already testing the testosterone levels of cisgender women. It used to be that if you're really muscular and you're cut, every Hollywood starlet, just for a moment there, really wanted to look like that. And they hired their trainers and they look so good and healthy. That's gone now. They would be accused now of being men or being trans or being gay. We had our moment. It's gone. 10%, 5 to 10% of women of childbearing age in this country have high testosterone levels. It's just a natural variation. If you want to compete in track and field internationally, you have to get your testosterone level checked. Basically, they're saying there are certain advantages that you have because of your genetics. Of course you do. If you're an elite athlete, of course you do. You have some advantage. Otherwise, we'd all be elite athletes, and that wouldn't make any sense. And testosterone is a really easy way to test it, but it will never end there. It already doesn't end there. They're kicking women out of track and field unless they take drugs to lower their testosterone level. They're policing our bodies. If you have high testosterone levels, it's entirely possible your body will just convert it into female hormones. It's not like everything is the same except you have high testosterone. You've had 15 years for your body to figure out what to do. And if you suddenly drop it, you may go into premature menopause. This idea that there's some magic thing that makes these women so unfairly better is absurd. And now they're testing your chromosomes. They're testing chromosomes. It's going to be fast twitch muscles next. It's hitting women of color the hardest. When Katie Ledecky was, outed as a trans woman, the whole sports community pushed back on it because she's a good kid and they have a residuum of decency all left in them, but she's also white. They push back on Serena Williams. people say things like she faked her pregnancy, and I mean, just crazy shit. And it's and Brittany Griner. I mean, you just go down the list.
Yeah, they were willing to let her rot in a Russian prison. Brittany Griner is unequivocally the best women's dunker of all time, for sure. Right. She's a future Hall of Famer, and they were willing to let her rot away in a Russian prison. The same people who are protecting the sanctity of women's sports. The anti-trans movement is also an anti-women's movement. Yes, and it's entirely possible that the athletes who are part of it don't realize that. It's possible. And if they don't realize it, I'm telling you right now, don't think that you're safe. Don't think that your daughter is safe. There was a story that I found of a cis woman who worked at Walmart. Mm-hmm. This poor gal. She's 6'4". Mm-hmm. I don't think she's not a particular athlete or anything. Some man followed her into the bathroom and demanded that she get out of the bathroom, and he was protecting women, and basically threatened this poor woman. And when she went to report it, she got fired. She lost her job because some random man now has permission to police her body based on nothing except his bias and prejudice. They have unleashed this monster of hate. There was another story about this poor little 9-year-old kid who's a track and field kid in Canada. She's a tomboy. Her parents say she likes short hair, so we let her wear short hair. Some random stranger came up to her and demanded that she prove that she was a girl and said, "You're a trans boy, you should not be competing in this." And then this guy's wife called the mother a pedophile and a genital mutilator. I mean, these people seem to think they have permission to attack everybody. So the last thing I'm going to show you is another picture. This is do you know who that is? I don't know.
She's very pretty.
Yeah.
She is not a trans woman.
Okay.
As far as I know. She's a member of the Utah State Board of Education. Mm-hmm. Utah has passed a ban on girls, trans girls playing in girls' sports, which has caused them to be buried in complaints from aggrieved parents whose kids didn't make the team, accusing other girls of being trans girls. Mm. They're being flooded with people marching into principal's office and saying, that girl can't play on the team. Mm-hmm. Well, the girls' basketball team of a local high school posed for a little ad for a sporting company uniforms or something like that. And a whole bunch of parents, according to this woman, this Board of Education, said, she's too masculine. She's trans. So this state official posted on her social media a picture of the team with the heading girls basketball, which caused a flood of abuse. This girl was immediately identified, and her family was flooded with hate and threats. And, this poor kid, and social media things, which I copied says, all of the girls on both teams should boycott the games until he is removed from playing. Stop the games. Do not play. Mercy, the dude doesn't even try to look like a girl. Barf. And then it just goes on and on and on. And I mean, that's what's happening. I mean, now this woman got censured because it was so embarrassing to the state. Even that was a little too far. Mm-hmm. And she said, gee, I never identified her as a boy. I never said it. I just asked the question, when are you going to stop beating your wife? That kind of thing. Right. I never said you were beating your wife. I just asked a question. Mm-hmm. But she knew what she was doing.
Yeah, of course.
And when she was asked to justify it, she said, our good faith efforts to be inclusive of girls of differing bodies have been taken advantage of, which leads to suspicion about girls who are more buff than others. she basically blamed it on people, fighting for the rights of these kids to play the sport. It has given them permission to question the gender of any woman, any girl who doesn't fit their preconceived image of what a girl athlete should be. Our sports are going to be stripped of our best athletes. The best potential athletes who would compete. When they're in high school, they're going to look at this and say, I don't want to be subject to this ridicule. Girls have real issues when they in puberty about body image. That's when they drop out of sports anyway, even really sporty kids, because they feel ashamed and they have questions. And now the better they are, the more you're pinning them with, a moniker that you've already taught is okay to hate. Who needs that? They're never going to compete. And then the women who do make it through are always going to be, they're no longer our talents of a generation, a generational talent. They're now men in a wig. Mm-hmm. You're not just talking about harassment. You're talking about genuine violence that's coming to visit on them. And the last thing I'm going to say about this, and I'll get off my high horse because I'm really upset about it. My governor had a conversation with Charlie Kirk, who I know not at all, know of him.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see what he had to say about things that the governor seemed to agree on. So in 2022, Charlie Kirk says he would have loved if transgender swimmer Leah Thomas tried to compete in 1950s America. Well, you don't know nothing about the 50s, pal. I do. I lived in the 1950s. And the fathers of every other competitor would have come out of the stands and formed a line in front of Thomas and saying, hey, tough guy, you want to get in a pool? Because you're going to have to come through us. Mm-hmm. That is a clear invitation to violence.
Yes, it is.
It's basically the guys standing in line, popping their knuckles, just daring this athlete to get in the pool. Mm-hmm. I like to think that if Leah Thomas had grown up in the 50s and had a supportive family, her father and her mother and all her father's buddies, who probably all fought in the Second World War, would be standing in front of her saying, you want to rumble? Let's take it outside. I mean, don't be so sure that your myth, it's their myth of the 1950s. Because I'll tell you, my father was very supportive of all of my athletic endeavors, always.
Yeah.
So don't be so sure. But that's a threat of violence.
Yeah.
And the violence has already come. And the violence is going to continue to come until we stop this nonsense, until we see what they're turning us against each other. I'm saying for the pittance that they give us while they continue to rule the roost and they want us to fight over the crumbs that are left. My generation fought that battle. We're 4 generations in. It's your battle now. We have to support you. You have to be willing to be called a bitch again. And, have all these slurs. You're going to be called a faggot and a queer and all of this stuff. You just got to go and fight that fight again. I really hope you step up and defend your sisters. Because when they come for one of us, they will come for all of us. Nobody is safe. This is where it needs to stop and just say, no further. You don't go any further.
Well, I think that's a good place to leave it, Mom. Thank you so much. I love you, and I'll talk to you soon. Not so fast. We're not done yet. On May 27th, President Trump posted the following on Truth Social. California, under the leadership of radical left Democrat Gavin Newsom, continues to illegally allow men to play in women's sports. This week, a transitioned male athlete at a major event won everything and is now qualified to compete in the state finals next weekend. As a male, he was less than average competitor. As a female, this transitioned person is practically unbeatable. This is not fair and totally demeaning to women and girls. Please be hereby advised that large-scale federal funding will be held back, maybe permanently, if the executive order on this subject matter is not adhered to. The governor himself said it is unfair. I will speak to him today to find out which way he wants to go. In the meantime, I'm ordering local authorities, if necessary, to not allow the transition person to compete in the state finals. This is a totally ridiculous situation. The, quote, transitioned person he's referencing there is a 16-year-old trans girl named A.B. Hernandez, who had recently qualified to compete in the California state finals in track and field. She'd become a fixation of high-profile online transphobes, and clearly this obsession of theirs had made its way all the way to the top. The CIF, the governing body for high school athletics in California, went into panic mode following Trump's threat and quickly changed the rules of the competition. In an attempt to thread the needle, they allowed A.B. Hernandez to compete, but were she to win, she would have to share her victory with other cis athletes. They essentially put an asterisk next to her name. But this seemed to address the supposed primary concern of the activists who had been so angry about the participation of trans girls in sports, that they were taking something away from real girls, that, quote, biological men were taking away spots from women on the podium. With this rule change, that would no longer be the case. And on Saturday, May 31st, that's exactly what happened. A.B. Hernandez placed first in 2 events and second in another. I suppose she wasn't completely unbeatable, and she shared the spot with other cis girls on the podium. Here's what one of her competitors thought of the whole situation.
They gave me the medal I deserved, they gave her the medal that she deserved, and sharing the podium was nothing but an honor. As a part of the queer community, I want A.B. Hernandez to know that we all have her back and we all have her support.
Whatever you think of the rule change, it seemed like the athletes there made the most of the situation. And considering the fact that one of the main arguments coming from the opponents to the participation of trans athletes was the idea that trans athletes were taking spots from women and girls, naturally, they were thrilled, right? They declared victory, right? No biological females were snubbed. They all got their medals and their spot on the podium, so they must have been ecstatic, right? No? Instead, they continued to flood social media and hurl transphobic hate at a 16-year-old girl, making no reference to the fact that nothing was taken away from any of the cis girl athletes. And the CIF's rule change did nothing to satisfy Trump either. On June 2nd, he followed up by stating, "A biological male competed in California girls' state finals, winning big, despite the fact that they were warned by me not to do so. As Governor Gavin Newsom finally understands, large-scale fines will be imposed." It was never about biological women unfairly losing their spots. It was just about excluding trans people. It was never about protecting girls, because in that same state championship, a young cis black girl who won the 400-meter race was stripped of her title for celebrating too much following her victory.
I worked so hard for that title.
The greatest moment of 16-year-old Clara Adams' young career taken away from her because of a celebration. After winning the 400-meter event at the CIF State Championships with a time of 53.24 seconds, her dream of winning a state title went up in flames after celebrating using a fire extinguisher.
When she blew the fire extinguisher, the opponents were gone. That was our moment of celebration, and the CIF officials made that about them. The crowd went crazy. They loved it. The booth, CIF booth went crazy. They loved it. But those few guys in those jackets, they took offense to it, didn't like it, and they made a decision based on emotions.
This decision by the CIF is completely outrageous and does more to harm girls than a handful of trans athletes ever could. And yet the supposed defenders of women and girls sports are nowhere to be found. Male athletes are celebrated for that kind of competitiveness, that kind of chutzpah all the time, and yet this girl is stripped of her title. Was she not being ladylike enough? Did she step outside of the box that society has tried to put her in? Was she behaving too much like a man? There really is a threat to women and girls sports in America right now, but it's not coming from trans people. Okay, now we're done. Thank you all so much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and let us know what you think in the comments. Also, we have a Patreon where you can help provide support for this channel. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.